So this is what we're talking about. So if you didn't want to hear about this, you're in the wrong room. I won't be offended if you leave. I mean, I might be offended, but I won't say anything out loud. I'll just like judge you silently because I'm from Minnesota and that's what we do. Yeah, right. But anyway, I'll start by introducing myself. So hi, I'm Michelle. I have a design background actually, although primarily now I focus on user interfaces and front-end development. And I spend most of my time actually designing for WordPress, which may or may not lend me more or less credibility on this particular stage with this particular group of people. So I'm sorry, that's what I do. And what I do is I actually spend a lot of time at WordCamps and other open source tech events like these. So this is great. I love the vibe here. Part of what happens is I am constantly in discussions about new tools and about resources and all these other things with a lot of other extremely smart people, especially people that do not do the same thing that I do. And I wanted to start this off by asking a question, kind of putting forth a situation. If you have spent any time where more than one developer is in the same room, or if you've read any article or blog post about the state of development, it's inevitable that we have discussions about our tools, about our code. But how many times have you done this where the conversation goes something like this? Don't use Codebase, it sucks. It's too heavy, it's too slow, it's unsemantic, it's not exciting, it's not X, Y, or Z enough. No one writes Codebase in year anymore. It's not modern. They came up with something better. This new framework is way more exciting. You got to jump on this bandwagon instead. I'm looking at you, JavaScript. Like, all right. I don't bother with Codebase because I just rolled my own. It's superlative. Why would you use that bloated old sluggish terrible tool when you can write a faster, leaner, more targeted, more performant one just like I did? Why the cuss are you using Codebase? It is so shocking to me that I don't even have words for it, and I am just going to shut this entire conversation down. You're not a real developer if you use Codebase. Real developers don't use frameworks, they don't use plugins, they don't use certain content management systems, they don't use certain languages, they don't use certain techniques. You're not a real developer. When you heard the statement like that in conversation or read it in an article or participated in that discussion, how did you react? Did you find yourself nodding along with the statement, laughing about it? Or were you on the other side trying to defend your choice? And why did you have that opinion in the first place? Did you ever think about how you formed that opinion? Where is the line that you draw between good tools and bad tools? Has that line changed for you over the years? And why has that line changed, if it has? So I just did some simple Googling of phrases for stuff that I use in my day-to-day life all the time. And you can see how many results there are for these things. These are 3 things I've used in most of my client projects. I know you've seen stuff like this before. Remember when I brought up WordPress and front-end development at the beginning of the project? I mean, why did I feel inclined to make an apologetic joke at you guys? And how did you react to that joke? Because some of you kind of laughed, right? What kind of environment does this create? How do these things contribute to the learning or inclusive environment of tech, especially in open source where we want lots of people to contribute? How do these things impact people that want to ask questions or learn? Now I know there's a rebuttal, like there are certain facts that do exist. We do have to talk about code security. We do have to talk about speed. We have to talk about best practices. There are things that do objectively make code better or worse. And we do need to discuss these things because there are actual repercussions to the code that we use. So what do? How do we talk about these very real factors without shutting down conversations or without dealing in absolutes? First, I want to get rid of several inaccurate assumptions that we have about the way people code and about the way people choose their tools. First one is we don't need someone else's stuff. We write our own. We do. Well, first of all, of course we do. We need tools. Unless you invented your own programming language, you are using other people's tools. And even if you did invent your own programming language, which is awesome, by the way, we should talk about that, you're using what you learned from other languages, right? And the whole reason we're all here is because we are all building on top of somebody else's toolkit. That's why you're here in the first place. We are already using somebody else's tools. So I want to get that one out of the way first. Another inaccurate assumption that we're only talking about code. The only thing we're discussing is what we're writing. and the outside context or who's actually writing it has nothing to do with it. That's an inaccurate assumption. Another assumption is that there's universally right and wrong answers that are going to be the same in all situations, and clearly you have come up with the right answer and everyone else is an idiot until you learn more and change your mind, but that's just the right answer, and then you were an idiot before, right? That's inaccurate assumption. The only limiting factor is a lack of skill, and also that every single other person can or wants to gain the same skills as you, so obviously the answer is to teach people to use better tools, aka the ones that you think are the better tools, right? Another inaccurate assumption, everyone's on the same journey, meaning we assume that everyone has taken similar paths to get their skills, everyone has a similar balance of skills, everyone has the same resources to acquire new skills, and everybody has similar baselines to build their skills upon, and therefore we can project our own personal experiences onto everyone else, and it will definitely apply. But the biggest assumption is that this is very simple. A person looks at two tools, two code bases, one is wrong, and the other one is right. So this is where we're going to get nerdy. I want to talk a little bit more about how I think it really works. So be excited, I am. And this is what I'm kind of calling game stats theory. So I think there are actually many parallels between how we choose our code, how we choose our tools, and how we play games. So who in here is a gamer at all, likes games of any sort, video games, board games, whatever. So awesome. Not only am I not a Google developer, but I'm not a gamer. But I am an avid observer. Pretty much everybody I know is into it in some way, and I love to watch people play. So I've watched board games, strategy games, card games, RPGs, open world, first-person shooters, collaborative games, whatever. Like, I've watched pretty much everything, and I've noticed that you can boil any game down to this collection of stats. So first of all, we have the game itself, right? What game are we playing? What genre of game is it? What are the rules? What are the restrictions, etc.? We have the player, or players, right? This is, in real world, would be the developer, designer, user, person making the decisions, right? And then we have tools. So in the game, that would be the specific weapons or resources or characters or moves that are available to you when you're playing. So I want to break this thing down and talk a little bit about how all these things work. So games have a series of stats that are associated with them. And the stats in each game impact who can participate and what tools are available and how attractive they are to use. So for example, most games have a time component, a complexity component, a resource component, and how important or how mission critical that thing is. And games can have different objectives. Like there's some games where the objective is resource management, there's competition versus collaboration, there's accumulation versus trying to beat somebody versus trying to destroy something. There's different objectives. So in development, that would be the situation that you're in, right? Why do you need to use the code and all of the internal and external factors that apply? So for example, let's break down the time stat. So time in a game is how long you have to complete this, right? So for example, you might have timed turns or timed levels in a game. You might also be playing this as a speed run where you're trying to do it as fast as possible versus completion where you're trying to tackle every single possible thing that you can do in a game. This impacts the time that it takes to play. For a developer, what could that mean? Internal or client timelines, obviously, there's a timeline. It could be the number of hours that you have available. Could be whether you're trying to be efficient versus trying to be thorough. It could be the methodology that you're using. Are you using an agile methodology? Do you do more of a waterfall methodology? How do you deploy these different phases? So these all impact the time of your game. Then there's complexity, and this is basically how intricate or involved this game is, right? So games have any number of factors that can change their complexity. You know, how many rules are there? What are the different processes you have to go through? How many levels or phases are there? Is this a linear game where you do one thing? Is it non-linear where you can kind of go everywhere? Open or closed world, single or multiplayer, single or multi-objective. Like there are things that can totally change the complexity of a game, infinite variables. And in development, it's pretty much the same way, right? So how complex is the functionality that you have to build? Do you have to integrate with any other applications or languages or platforms? Do you have to do more than one language? I mean, in the web, front end, back end, you know, interfacing with an API, etc. What kind of compliances do you have to deal with? What kind of security do you have to deal with? These are all things that impact the complexity. And then we've got our resources. So resources inside the game would be, you know, your supply of money, materials, or other assets necessary to actually complete gameplay. So one being, you know, as a player, how much time do you have to play this game? I mean, are you playing it for an hour or two on weeknights, or are you spending, you know, like a 48-hour marathon session to get through something, right? With a lot of games, there's, you know, an inside game budget, like how many coins does your character have to spend on whatever. There's also an outside game budget, like do you have to purchase things in the real world in order to play this game, like additional cards or additional tools or additional things that cost like real dollars. In development, obviously, we have a set of resources as well that are finite. What's the project budget? What are the manpower hours that we have to dedicate per week? Do we have to get any specific licenses that cost money? Are there anything else that like costs money or resources? And then we come to importance, which is how critical it is to complete a game or level to a specific degree of success. So in a game, obviously, playing with your friends, you know, on a Friday night versus being in a competition, there's different levels of importance as to whether you win. Things that impact player reputation, things where one thing builds on another thing, and so the first thing has to be complete to go to the next thing. In development, obviously, there's tons of things that impact importance. A lot of things that determine how mission critical a project is, how secure it has to be, whether we're dealing with stuff like e-commerce, how much money the client stands to lose if something goes down, what kind of uptime requirements there are, how important a particular thing is within a company. Does it have symbolic importance? Like, is it going to get the CEO's son like some recognition? Like, whatever it is, there are different things that impact importance of the game. Next, we have the player. So the player is you or I, or the person who is developing or using the code. And not only do games have a whole bunch of variables, but players themselves have a whole bunch of variables. Player stats can impact which games they play, how far they get, and which tools are available to them. Players have skills, which is the ability for them to use the tools. They have knowledge, which is familiarity with the game and familiarity with what tools are available. And they also have a philosophy, how and why they play the game, or as a developer, how and why we use the tools that we use. So skill is, like I said, the ability to use or wield these tools. In the game, that would be something like, you know, what is your player's level? What is your experience points? What guild are they a part of? What team are they a part of? Often these skills need to be acquired in a specific order. If you've played through any game, you can't really progress to this level until you've been at this level. There's certain games where you could have different skill levels depending on what kind of tools you have. Like I know in Skyrim, there's like a billion different ways you can acquire things, and you can be really terrible in this area and really great in this area. So there's like multiple ways to have skills within a game. For developers, what does that mean? You know, what languages do you know? What type of development work do you usually do? Front end, back end? Are you sysadmin? Are you know, computer scientist, software engineer? Yeah, again, you often have to learn those skills on top of each other. You can't jump right into advanced stuff without knowing beginner stuff. And yeah, you can have different skill levels for the different things that you've done. So obviously my skill level at CSS is probably a lot higher than my skill level at PHP, and it's definitely much higher than my skill level at a language I've never touched. That's just how it works. There's also knowledge. So knowledge is actually not, in addition to skill, it's like how familiar are you with the whole game. So knowing the whole ecosystem, knowing the project requirements, knowing the languages or frameworks. For example, if you're playing a new game, have you played similar games before? So you kind of know how it works. Have you played this particular game before? How well do you know all the little ins and outs of all the rules? How well do you know the map? Do you know like the secret location of the one thing that you have to go get because you've read about it? In dev, you know, maybe you haven't worked with this specific thing before, but you've worked with a similar language. Maybe you've worked with this language, and so you understand how this language works. Are you familiar with the overall community? Do you know, like if you're working on Android development, do you know that, you know, Google developer groups exist? Do you have this larger resource you can tap into? These are all the different things that go into knowledge. And then there's your philosophy. And this is basically how and why we play the game. Do you prefer to play your game by just playing straight through the main story? Are you trying to play through it as fast as possible for speed? Do you like to play it thoroughly so you get every single little side quest? How do you like to play the game? If you're a developer, Do you prefer to write your code to be readable, maintainable, secure, accessible, performant, cutting edge? Like what's driving you to write your code? Some of these things can be in opposition to each other. Sometimes readable and performant are not necessarily on the same thing if you like concatenating everything, right? Or that kind of stuff. The same player can also play different games with different philosophies. You might approach one sort of project one way and another sort of project a different way. So this all just goes to show there's a lot of variables in how you as a player play these games. And then we have the tools. And each tool has its own set of stats as well. So obviously you can see this is very complicated. Tools have a set of requirements that limit which players or games can use them, but the value and risks are kind of relative. So value, I consider any element to a tool that you'd consider a positive point or a strength. So for example, this tool is secure and well supported and has good documentation. I just made up these little icons, right? But the negatives is that it's kind of time consuming and super complex, right? To some people, that might be seen as a net positive, like, oh, sweet, those are the things I care about. The other ones are fine. We have the time and budget for that. To somebody else, that'd be like, oh, time-consuming and complicated. We don't have time for that in this project. I have to find another tool, right? But then there's also the absolute things, like they require a player with a skill level of 5, a knowledge level of 8, and this particular type of game in order to use this tool. So there's lots of different factors that impact whether or not you can use the tool and whether or not you want to use this tool. Obviously, in development, we're talking about stuff like what particular language or framework you're using, what particular modules, what particular anything. Usually, you're going to be using multiple tools over the course of a game, right? You don't just play with one weapon. Or you might change the tools as the game changes, as the game gets harder, as you go to a new level. So yeah, we talked a little bit about value, which is the positive points or strengths in favor of using a tool. So this one, secure, well-supported, well-documented. And if you, as a player, if that aligns with your philosophy, then you're going to assign this tool a high value. But if not, then you're not going to necessarily assign this tool a high value. And some value, even if a tool has like high value, it might be mitigated by certain risks, right? So these are the negative points, liabilities, or weaknesses against a tool. So again, if you are a person where you need to get this done as fast as possible, you probably don't want to pick a time-consuming or complex tool. But if you have unlimited time, then the values are going to outweigh the risks. So the point is that it's relative every single time that you're picking a tool. And then you've got our requirements, the prerequisites for the player that can wield this tool. So that's your skill level, that's your knowledge, and that's the type of game or the level of gameplay reached. Obviously, most of what I do, most of the tools I use on a day-to-day basis would not be applicable to what most of you are doing on a day-to-day basis, because it doesn't even apply to that game, right? I can't, wield a sword while playing Go, right? Like that's not how, you could. That'd be kind of great. Actually, I want to see that. But that's the point. So how do stats impact this gameplay? I'm going to take you through like some specific scenarios. So first of all, modifying your player stats impacts the way that you pick tools. So first of all, we've got this player, we call him the noob, right? Low skill, low knowledge player. So to the low skill, low knowledge player, we see this is the set of tools that exists. The ones that are lighter are the ones that they know about, that they're aware of, and the ones that are darker are the ones that they don't know about. And the ones that have a no over them are ones that they are not capable of using right now for whatever reason. So they basically have one tool available to them, and that's it. They get their one hammer. That's the only one that fits within their skill set. So that means the noob, they don't have a lot of tools available. They can't complete every game, right? Because you can't get to the end of most games without learning a few things. The thing about it, though, is that they may not actually want to increase the skills to play themselves. They may be more comfortable actually finding somebody else who knows more than them to do it for them. That might be better. So we're not assuming that every single person who's a noob wants to become an expert, but it is the case that they do not have many tools available. We have this other player type called the enthusiast, and I notice this a lot more in open source communities, I would say, and that's somebody who has low skills. They maybe don't know how to do everything, but they have high knowledge, so they're extremely familiar with the ecosystem and the things that are out there. So they're very, very aware of the game. They have a low skill level to wield the tools, so they can't actually use them. But they know about almost all of them. So, they've read everything. They're aware of all the new stuff that's coming out. They could have a conversation about it. They just don't actually do it themselves. These people I notice often have a desire to learn and increase their skills, or definitely partner with somebody who has the skills to be able to do it. So they're very enthusiastic about it, even though they may not know how to do it themselves. And then we've got the artisan, which is a high skill but low knowledge player. And I use in the WordPress community, I use as an example a PHP developer, a very good PHP developer who does not work with WordPress very often. And this person has very high skill. They know exactly what they're doing with PHP. They're great. But they don't know WordPress. And WordPress has its own way of doing things. And WordPress has its own framework. So obviously they're very smart, but they're very frustrated because they don't know the ecosystem that they're coding in. And so they do a lot of things maybe contrary to the way that you would do them if you know. They don't know about a whole lot of the tools that are available to make their job easier, and it's very frustrating to them. So very, very smart, very knowledgeable people can still be frustrated if they don't know the game that they're playing. Then we have the expert, high skill, high knowledge. So this is a person that works in the tool all the time and knows exactly what they're doing. They're aware of most things. They definitely desire and are able to learn about things, and they're probably also the most likely to argue about the tools that they're using with each other, right? Because we're combining knowledge and skill, so these are the people that are going to have the debates about tools. Then we have modifying gameplay. How does modifying the game we're playing impact the way that we pick tools? This is a game called the Churn and Burn, which is a low time, low budget game, everybody's favorite game. So if you need to do something quickly or cheaply, you might be more inclined to reach for some of these easier tools, right? Even a high skill player may choose to wield simpler tools due to cost or ease of use. Example, if you're a primarily backend developer on the web and you need to put together an entire site, you might pull in a front-end framework to do your visual output, because that's not your strength. It's there and you can use it. You can build your backend to do stuff, but you're going to use someone else's existing tool for front end because that's not your strength and you're trying to get it done quickly. So I know we're all familiar with stuff like this, and this is a reason why people that could write things themselves or could do everything in a more complicated way maybe don't, and that's okay. Conversely, there's the mission critical game, right? So it's very complex and very important. This does actually prevent many low-level players from joining the game. People that don't really know how to do everything can't work on something like this. And it means that the only tools that are actually eligible to be used in this game are tools that require high skill, high knowledge, and a low risk. They want very few mitigating factors, right? In development, this is meaning you have to be very, very choosy about the code, very choosy about the stuff, the libraries you're including, make sure everything is highly vetted, secure, maintained, or bespoke. You wrote it yourself, you could tell everything about it. So very, very different game than the churn and burn game where we're trying to get things done cheaply and effectively. This is like super critical, needs high level. There are certain combination of stats that are unbeatable, right? The game that you can't win, like a high complexity, low budget game. Because there are either no qualified players or no usable tools. So the tools you need to win are not accessible within the parameters of the game. We cannot build this complex platform for you on a $500 budget. It is not happening. It is not possible. It will not work. So there are certain games that you can't win, and that's okay. Then we've got the tools themselves. So the values, risks, and requirements of each tool impact how you pick the tool. So first of all, you could have the same tool. It's like, a level 8 tool. Actually, it's the same skill level, different tools. They're both level 8. So I am a level 8. I could use either one of these tools. Based on my values, thanks. Based on my values, I would have to choose which one is better. So my value, I value security. So this one's got good security, that one's got crappy security. So obviously I'm going to pick this one because that aligns with my values. And it will align with most people's values, I hope. Security would be a factor that's more heavily weighted than others, right? Because it's very important. So it's not necessarily on the same level as like being well documented. Like maybe it's really well documented but super insecure. I don't care how well documented it is, I'm not going to use it, right? Also, who you are, if you're picking between the same tools, this is a tool with the same set of values and the same set of risks, but player A values these things, and player B thinks those things are worse. So again, player A is like, oh great, secure, well documented, well supported, this is amazing. Player B is like, oh, time consuming and complicated, no thanks. Same tool, different players, they make a different decision. So a tool one person sees as an asset, the other person might see as a liability. So what does all of this mean in terms of actually talking about code and actually talking to each other? Well, first of all, it means that this is not simple. It is not as simple as looking at two things and A is wrong and B is right in every case. That's not how it works. As you can see, it's actually very, very complicated. The choices we make in the tools that we use are impacted by our own skill, our knowledge, and our philosophy. They're impacted by the restrictions and parameters of the project we're working on, and how we value the values and risks of each tool. So what does that mean? It means that decisions are actually multi-dimensional, right? We are not making decisions based on one single black and white factor. There are a whole lot of things that go into whether or not we choose to use or not use a certain tool. There are other reasons that people make a different choice than you besides just a lack of knowledge. It's not just because they don't know. They might know something else that you don't know, and that is what's gone into them making that choice. It's also true that not everybody wants to gain the skills that you have. Even when we want to spread knowledge and awareness, it doesn't mean that everybody wants to learn how to wield the tools. We don't all have to learn to code or be proficient in every single tool, language, or framework. So what can we do when we're talking about this? Well, first of all, stop this. Stop saying stuff like this, stop writing stuff like this. This isn't helping anyone. It's inflammatory, and what it really does is it turns people off who want to learn or join a community. Dealing in absolutes, saying that somebody's chosen language, that somebody's chosen tool is crap, that's shitty. Don't do that. We can, though, help increase people's knowledge without necessarily trying to increase their skills. So what does that mean? It means that we can help our clients who don't want to be developers be able to make empowered decisions because they understand the context of what they're doing better. We can help other developers make empowered decisions, even if they don't want to know exactly the same thing that we're doing. It doesn't mean that they have to learn how to wield the tool, just to understand the knowledge. It's also important to learn when to concede. So a lot of good games include built in the ability to kind of say you win without like a long drawn out losing battle where you just like have to sit there and wait until you die. We can learn when to walk away or when to ask for help if we need it. This is an important part of being able to play a game. If there is something you don't know, partner with complementary skill sets. Make yourselves better. You don't have to know how to do everything. You should know how to do what you do well and find somebody who knows how to do what they do well and work with them. That way, it'll help us keep learning and make more tools be available. But most importantly, we want to have empathetic discussions about our tools. We want to be able to learn more about why we make decisions, be able to help educate people where necessary, and then communicate effectively because we understand that there's more to it than just right and wrong. So this is me. That's my stuff. That's the link where my slides are at. I'm on Twitter. And I'm happy to answer questions or whatever. That was that. Yay. Thank you. Golf clap. Yeah. Yeah. If anybody has any questions about anything for any reason, you get like 15 more minutes of my time for free. So, yes.
How do you go about implementing when somebody's learning into, say, a developer or a serious engineer? How would you bring that up, that topic? This is where we are. These are our personas that we have out there.
Sure. I don't quite understand what you're asking. Can you maybe?
Yeah. So I like this. We make these observations as the managers and the directors here. We see that this is what's happening, but we don't know how to take action on it.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's where we can start.
So for the people, this is being recorded. So basically, your question is like, how do we? So if we see kind of more negative discussions happening, how do we kind of enable other people? Like, how do we enable people within our company to be able to have these more positive discussions instead of So it's kind of twofold. First of all, each company does have their set of parameters. There's like, our company does things this way. So there's like, those are the game rules, right? And so those are kind of absolute. We can Like, we can say within our company, we use an agile methodology, we use XY language, we use this way of doing version control, this way of doing branching, this way of managing this. Those are your rules. So those are things we can deal in absolutes on because everybody does that. But when we're talking about within that, I think honestly with most conversations, and especially this, it's really important to be like, well, what problem are you trying to solve with this? And then we can figure out the right answer rather than saying, well, I would always pick X or I would always pick Y. It's like, okay, what problem are you trying to solve? What are the constraints? Like learning more about why somebody's making a decision. So I just think encouraging people to ask why, not in like a condescending like, why are you doing that? But like, why are you doing that? You know, that helps people be able to have more productive conversations than just kind of saying their opinion, if that helps. Yeah. Yes?
I've heard this just recently where another employee kind of told me, well, sometimes people don't know what they want until they see it. Does that fit into sort of anything that you've kind of discussed today?
So the question being the whole not knowing it till you see it thing, which yes, I mean, especially in the design world, that comes up a lot, right? Again, though, I think that having a conversation about the problem itself always helps, because then we can start talking about solutions. And also the other person feels heard, right? So it's not just that I'm sitting here and telling you this is the way that we're going to do things to solve your thing, and they're like, well, I don't know if that's right or not. Like, I won't know. You know, having a conversation where you learn more about whatever problem it is that you're trying to solve for them, or, you know, I don't know, dialogue. It's like, I can just sum all of this up. I would like, just talk to each other. Okay, I'm gone. Like, that's... and we all could have gone to lunch sooner. But I think that's the biggest thing, is just being able to have this dialogue and really, like, hear what they feel the problem is. Specifically in design, because that's where I come from. You know, you get a lot of make the logo bigger situations, right? Where somebody tells you to do something, and you're like, that really has nothing to do with the problem. So somebody might be like, oh, I heard that we should use this language, or I like the color green, or our pop-up window's a thing. Like, they say something, and you're like, where is this coming from? That's a terrible idea. But if you ask them, like, oh, well, like, what problem are we trying to solve with this? It's like, oh, like user engagement, or I don't feel my brand is prominent enough, or I heard it was really secure. Like, now we can start having a conversation. Like, oh, you're worried about security. Let me talk to you about X, Y, and Z. Oh, you're worried about user engagement. All right, well, how about this? And then you can actually, like, talk about it, and you've heard them. You don't have to take their weird idea that wouldn't really work with the project, but you see where they're coming from and give them a better solution. Yeah.